This presentation is a brief introduction to an important part of the United States postal system, the handling of dead letters. Dead letters are considered mail that cannot be delivered to the addressee or returned to the sender. As such, a dead letter is one of the few instances where postal personnel are allowed to violate the secrecy of private correspondence to search for clues as to the letter's origin or destination. Ben Franklin became the first postmaster of Philadelphia while it was still under British rule in 1737. At that time, and well before anyone had ever considered anything like a postage stamp, postage was paid by the recipients of the mail rather than the senders. This arrangement created an issue for Franklin, and by 1741, he had hundreds of recipients who had not picked up their mail and paid the necessary penny for it. So he published a list of 800 names and warned that if they were not redeemed before March 25th, he would, quote, send away as dead letters to the General Post Office. This was the first use of the term dead letters in the United States that I have been able to find. The United States officially established the Postal Service in 1775, and the position of the Inspector of Dead Letters, who was responsible for figuring out where dead letters should be sent, was implemented in 1777. This approach existed for nearly 50 years until the logistics drove the development of the first dead letter office in 1825. Postmasters around the country sent all their undelivered and unidentified mail to a single centralized Washington, D.C. office for the next 92 years. It is interesting to note that during the 1860s, with the nation's men fighting in the Civil War, women employees outnumbered men 38 to 7 in the dead letter office. These ladies were considered skilled dead letter detectives and inspected the details of letters for potential clues about who sent it or where it was going. After the Civil War and into the 1880s, the dead letter office continued to employ many women and a few clergymen, assuming they would be more honest and discreet when opening a stranger's mail item. One especially notable employee during this period was Mrs. Patty Collins, who became renowned at sleuthing missing or garbled addresses. Ladies' Home Journal called Collins the dead letters office presiding genius, and another called her the greatest living expert in deciphering illegible and defective letter addresses. As a widow with 3 children, she relied upon her significant education and familiarity in languages, family history, and geography. For example, Collins took an envelope with the address Miss Isabel Marbury, Stock, and had it delivered correctly to Stockbridge, Massachusetts, knowing that Marbury was a common last name in that town. While the DLO employees did everything possible to recognize the recipients or senders, some pieces defied identification. In these situations, further disposition includes sending any currency found to the U.S. Treasury. Periodicals and reading materials were donated to Washington, D.C. area charities, and other items of value were typically held for a period of time with the hope that they might be eventually claimed. The rooms holding these items were not organized, but they held countless numbers of unusual mailed items. So much so that throughout the late 1800s, the DLO developed into a kind of museum and tourist attraction. The public was allowed to wander through the loosely organized display of items, and occasionally a visitor would become reunited with a lost item. The Dead Letter Office also retrieved any unclaimed mailed Civil War photos and compiled these into albums. For years after the war, family members made trips to view these Dead Letter Office albums to search for loved ones lost. If a visitor did find an image of their loved one, they were allowed to take the photograph home with them. The museum eventually closed, and all the existing contents were transferred to the Smithsonian and later to the Smithsonian National Postal Museum. The fees for handling dead letters have been quite varied over time, ranging from no charge up to as much as 70 cents. To better understand dead letter rates, the timeline shown here illustrates the fee evolution. By 1882, the Dead Letter Office dealt with 13,600 pieces of mail each day, and by 1893, the volume had increased to over 20,000 items per day. And by 1900, the volume had increased to over 30,000 items per day. The approach of a single Washington-based clearinghouse for all dead letters was beginning to buckle, and a new solution was called for. As such, and in 1917, Congress authorized the decentralization of the Dead Letter Office, and new branches were established in several cities, including New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Atlanta, Boston, New Orleans, Omaha, and Honolulu. Currently, all undelivered mail is once again handled through a single, centralized location, the Mail Recovery Center, located in Atlanta, Georgia. Last year, they received over 67 million items. For the collector or postal history enthusiast, Dead Letter Mail offers a fascinating variety of auxiliary markings, forms, labels, and envelopes. Over its 245-year existence, the DLO has utilized a wide variety of ways to document the handling of dead letters. In its early years, special cancels and forms were used. Sometime in the 1860s, envelopes began to be used, and this was followed by the use of printed labels in the 1880s. The following slides provides some information on collecting these intriguing items. This early ship letter is dated July 20th, 1819, from New London, Connecticut, with a Brooklyn, New York destination. The addressee was not found, so it was sent on to the DLO office and carries its auxiliary marking. The value of this early DLO stampless cover is $125. There are many interesting early dead letter forms which often explicitly describe the nature of the identification issues. Shown here is an example of an 1831 dead letter form which states, "The enclosed dead letter, which appears to have been originally mailed at your office and forwarded agreeably to the address, has not been received by the person for whom it was intended. It has been examined as the law directs and found to be of value." This form recently sold for $75. On October 6, 1869, this Richview, Illinois cover was sent to Bloomington. Without a stamp attached, the cover was held for postage in the Bloomington post office before being sent on to the Dead Letter Office, as shown by the magenta October 11, 1869 auxiliary marking. The value of this cover is $25. This August 30th, 1881 cover was sent from the Brooklyn Sugar House to Cuba. Unable to find the addressee in several places in Cuba, the cover was returned to the Washington, D.C. DLO office on November 12, 1881. The Washington office applied the dead letter cancel, the return to writer pointing hand cancel, and the unclaimed auxiliary marking. The value of this cover is $65. During the 1880s, a number of dead letter labels were issued and began to be used. These are typically collected on cover and range from rare to fairly common. Values span from $5 to $1,500 per cover. Labels are still in use today, although most have been replaced with rubber stamps. This October 16, 1882 Columbus, Ohio cover was sent without a return address and a deficient recipient address. The DLO office received it on October 20th and sent it to the Cincinnati post office on October 27th. This desirable cover with label is valued at $400. The first cover shown here carries a DLO label affixed on a wrapper to Frankfurt, Germany, with a Baltimore, Maryland, May 1, 1900 CDS cancel. This cover could not be delivered and was returned to the United States. This rare item, one of 3 recorded of this label on cover, sold for $800. This cover shows a DLO office labeled affixed to a wrapper to England bearing 2-cent stamps and sent to DLO, Baltimore, Maryland, October 20th, 1894 marking. Another rare item, one of only 2 recorded of this label on cover, sold for $625. The DLO had access to and used various official envelopes throughout its history. Of particular interest to collectors are DLO return envelopes with geometric symbols on them. These were first introduced in 1877 and saw use until the mid-1950s. There are 4 geometric symbols: a 6-pointed star, a square, a triangle, and a circle. The triangle symbol envelope is commonly found and identifies it as an item that was sent back to the original mailer by the returning division of the DLO office or branch. An envelope with a 6-pointed star designates that it was handled by a minor division of the DLO or branch and used to return a dead letter. The same minor division used a circle to identify items that had been opened and found to contain no enclosure of value. The most uncommon symbol is the square, which was used by the property division to identify letters not advertised and marked unclaimed and for undeliverable parcels. Thank you for listening to this introduction into this fascinating aspect of U.S. postal history and for supporting the Stamp Smarter website.